everybody in SADS Facebook Live land. I'm Mike Ackerman, genetic cardiologist at Mayo Clinic and director of Mayo Clinic's Winland Smith Rice Genetic Heart Rhythm Clinic, coming to you on behalf of Alice Laura, the CEO of the SADS Foundation, the Sudden Arrhythmia Death Syndrome Foundation, for Facebook Live session number 46. Can you believe it? And our third one in the new year 2021. So wherever this finds you in the afternoon, evening, morning, throughout the globe, we're so glad you've joined us live or watching it in review on your own leisure. We've had over 120,000 views since we started doing this in February, when the COVID-19 pandemic was just starting to build, and now here we are. And I am so excited to update you about all things COVID-19 with one of the foremost authorities on COVID-19 here at Mayo Clinic, Dr. Stacey Rizza, who you may remember, she joined me at episode number 22 on July 24, 2020. And that episode with Stacey, with Dr. Rizza, has been the most viewed episode of all 45 so far, with over 20,000 views. And I asked her then, and she agreed to come back in about 6 months to give us an update as to where we are with COVID-19. And this is going to be fantastic. And so I really appreciate that. And some of you may remember that when Dr. Rizza was with us, there were just over 20 million cases worldwide on July 24th, 738,000 deaths. 6 months later, over 93 million cases worldwide and 2 million deaths. In the United States, when Dr. Rizza joined us, there were 5.1 million cases and 164,000 deaths. And now, as of 10 minutes ago, there were 23.4 million cases in the United States and 389,500 deaths. So much has happened. When Dr. Rizza was with us then, she had shared with us that based upon the advances that were attained at that time, we did not even know whether there would be a therapeutic vaccine for SARS-CoV-2 to treat COVID-19. And we did not know, she told us, you remember, that are we going to have a vaccine in bucket A, HIV-like, it doesn't work, bucket B, influenza-like, a good vaccine, but not necessarily amazing, or bucket C, almost a curative vaccine like mumps, measles, rubella, MMR, or polio. And here we are. And without further ado, I'm going to have Dr. Stacey Rizza join us to tell us what has happened from July 24th till now. And so Aaron, the mastermind behind our SADS Facebook Live session, is going to bring Dr. Stacey Rizza to join us for the rest of our time together. And there she is.
Well, hello. Thank you very much, Dr. Ackerman, and the entire SADS community for having me come back.
It's great to have you back, Stacey. And Dr. Rizza, it's hard for me to say Dr. Rizza because some of you might remember Dr. Rizza is also my next door neighbor, or I'm her next door neighbor. And so
both ways.
She's a very special person. But Stacey, Dr. Rizza, set the stage for, you did it back then. Where are we now?
Great question. I will say, I'll give an overview of the different parts of our approach, meaning humanity's approach to getting through the pandemic. And I will try to cover the 30,000-foot view, and then I'll welcome your questions afterwards, Mike, to get more nuanced into each of those areas. And I can say in the short, very, very quick comment, there's some things that are unfortunate now that we're seeing each other 6 months later with the number of cases and the number of deaths. But there are also some parts that are very fortunate. And I will get into those as we go through. So I would like you all to form a visual image of 3 overlapping circles, like a Venn diagram. So you have one in the middle, one on the side, and one on the other side. So in the middle, all 3 of those circles overlap. And that middle intersection is the sweet spot that is going to get us through the pandemic. And the 3 buckets that it's going to require, and it's going to need all 3 to happen, is number 1, early diagnosis and early treatment. So we know that if somebody is sick with COVID, we need to get them tested so that we know whether or not they have COVID, and we need to get them quarantined so they can't infect other people. And compared to where we were 6 months ago, we have numerous tests available. Some of them very good, some not as good. Some of them very fast, some not as fast. Some communities have very, very easy and frequent access to testing. Some communities not as much. And that's an area we still need to work on. But the take-home messages are that we know the PCR tests are very sensitive and specific. So they're over 95% sensitive and specific. So if you do the test once somebody is symptomatic, it's pretty reliable that that test result is accurate. It's not perfect, but it's pretty reliable. And if we know that somebody is infected, we can quarantine them so that they don't infect other people. Now, the other thing we know now that we didn't even know 6 months ago is we can give very, very early treatment to help prevent people from going forward in their syndrome to becoming very sick and needing to be hospitalized, needing to be ventilated, or unfortunately in some situations dying. And the predominant treatment that we know can be very effective are these monoclonal antibodies that you've likely heard about in the news. And they're essentially antibodies that are formed to fight the virus. So if you are a person who is over 65 or has medical conditions that would make you more vulnerable to having bad COVID disease, or you're immunosuppressed, or anything else that we know means you're more likely to progress and become very sick, and you're diagnosed with SARS-CoV-2 infection, we highly recommend getting this one-time infusion of these antibodies. We have excellent data that it's a game changer. It can prevent these people who are more vulnerable to getting sick with the disease to ever entering the hospital or needing advanced care for their COVID. So diagnosing people early and treating them early, we know is going to prevent deaths and make fewer people infected. Now, the one antiviral medicine that has been proven to be effective against SARS-CoV-2 is the drug called remdesivir. And we also know giving that drug to people who are in the hospital earlier in their syndrome rather than later can also prevent deaths and make people and help people to get out of the hospital faster. And so that is why it's so important to not wait till you get very, very sick and then say, oh, I'll just weather my way through it, or just wait till people are far more advanced before coming to the hospital and being tested. Testing early and treating early is going to be a large part of getting us through the pandemic and saving lives. So that's the top circle. The circle on the side is what I call public health measures or preventive measures. And those are the things you've been hearing us talk about all along. Wearing a mask when you're around other people. There you go. Thank you, Mike, for demonstrating. Social distancing, hand hygiene, and disinfecting high-touch items. We know this works. Thank you again. We have our demonstrator here. We know this prevents transmission of infection. Even in some of the variants that are more infectious, this works equally as well. It's not rocket science. It's not magic. It's just simple, good public health measures that work. And we know we are going to need that for quite a while. Even in people who have been infected previously or who have been vaccinated, there is still the possibility, the data is not finalized, but it's very suggestive, that you could be immune but still be infected again, feel fine because you're immune, and still shed virus that can infect other people. So even if we get to a point that many, many people are vaccinated, until a herd immunity is achieved, and I can talk about what will be required for that later, we know people are still going to have to wear masks, have to socially distance, and do hand hygiene. Because even if you feel fine, you could still potentially transmit it to others who are not immune, and the pandemic will continue and the deaths will continue. So that is going to be a very, very important part of getting through the pandemic for quite a while. And we can talk later during the questions on how long I think that's probably going to last. And then the third circle in the Venn diagram is herd immunity or acquired immunity to the infection. And that is predominantly through the vaccine, which, as Mike said, we got very lucky with this virus. Now, in the scheme of viruses, in fact, most viruses that infect humans, we do not have great vaccines. In fact, in most cases, we don't have any vaccine that'll work, despite decades of outstanding science.
Right.
In this case, as terrible as this pandemic has been, we got really lucky with this virus. They used very, very cool, very modern, very new technology so that we could develop a vaccine quickly. But quite frankly, it's a brain-dead vaccine. You essentially threw a protein, our bodies formed an antibody, and holy mackerel, it worked at over 95%. So in the big scheme of things, we hit the jackpot on this virus that it actually is quite straightforward to make a vaccine against it. Now, right now in the United States, we have 2 vaccines that are approved, and we're starting to vaccinate people, as most of you are aware. Different parts of the world, there are a few other vaccines in the mix, which we can talk about if the audience is interested. But as a whole, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are the ones that are approved and have the highest shown efficacy thus far. It is very likely we'll have another one in February. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is likely to go for approval. And that vaccine is a single-dose vaccine. So that'll make it a little easier. And the more vaccines we have on the market, the more people we can vaccinate, the more of our population we can get immune to this virus. Again, we don't know if immunity means they won't spread. So until we have a very, very, very high number of people vaccinated, even as people are being immunized, we still need to do the public health measures. We still need to do diagnoses, and we still need to treat early. So the other thing that people have been wondering about is what happens when this virus mutates? And this is one other area that so far, and I'm touching wood, we've gotten very lucky with this vaccine. We know viruses mutate. It happens every time there's a virus that infects humans. And some of those mutations can cause problems that change how the virus works. The worst thing that can happen is it changes in a way that the virus is no longer sensitive to the medicines we have to treat it. And so far that has happened. Our one medicine, remdesivir, there are variants that are resistant. But the good news is the mutation that caused it to be resistant to remdesivir also has caused the virus to not replicate very well. And it's kind of a weak virus and it burns itself out. And at the same time, other mutations that potentially could make the virus resistant to the vaccine have happened. We know it's going to happen. That's what happens in viruses in humans. But fortunately, again, we got so lucky with this virus. So far, those mutations have also made the virus weak, and it doesn't replicate well, and it burns out. So in the big scheme of things, we've actually gotten lucky twice. Number one, this is a virus that fortunately was fairly straightforward to make a vaccine. And secondly, the mutations it's had so far have not changed the 2 most important things of all: how it replicates in the body as far as what it causes, what the disease it causes, and also whether or not it's resistant to our drugs or our vaccines. So I'll just give one quick summary at the end. The 3 pieces are all going to be needed: early diagnosis and treatment, good public health measures, and vaccination.
Dr. Rizza, that is a fantastic overview, and to all of those who have been joining us, who I'm recognizing your names and your faces, welcome from all over the globe. And I'm going to be grabbing some of your questions and summarizing them for Stacey. But we have rapid testing, early treatment. We can talk about, we have the public health measures, keep wearing the mask, and I'm going to come back to that for you to emphasize. But then on vaccine and acquired herd immunity, let's take a question there from Alicia and its safety. Because I remember when we were together in July, we were spending a lot of time telling our patients, that some of the treatments that were being used then, and in some parts of the world still used, hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, are QT dangerous to our patients with genetic long QT syndrome and should not be used. 6 months later, I hope people realize that not only are they dangerous to our long QT patients, they really didn't deliver on therapeutic efficacy for SARS-CoV-2. So hopefully for most places in the world, they're not using it, even though some people still swear that it works. But should we leave hydroxychloroquine for rheumatoid arthritis?
Yes.
Okay.
So I can say definitively, as far as hydroxychloroquine, it is an anti-inflammatory. It works for lupus and Sjogren's and rheumatoid arthritis. It has been studied extensively in its oral form, hydroxychloroquine, in its IV form, chloroquine, in all different stages of SARS-CoV-2, for prevention of SARS-CoV-2, in every angle, by thousands of patients, by multiple groups all over the world, and the results are continuously consistent that it doesn't work, unfortunately. It would have been nice to have an easy oral pill, but unfortunately it just doesn't work.
On the other hand, the vaccine, like you said, is wow, holy mackerel, I think you said, incredible efficacy, 95%. Is it safe? It seems to some people that this came by so fast, and I've told all of my patients, every genetic heart patient we see at the SADS Foundation, long QT syndrome, CPVT, Brugada syndrome, doesn't matter your name. If you are 16 years or older, you can get the vaccine. You should get the vaccine. Yes. It is safe for your heart.
Yes.
You agree, Stacey?
Absolutely and completely. So I think it's important for people to understand the vaccine development process. And what people need to realize is the parts of this vaccine development that were accelerated was the regulatory issues, the enrollment of patients, the paperwork, but what was not accelerated was the science or the rigor. So normally you enroll about 4,000 patients into a vaccine trial and you watch for several years. Because of the enormous need for a vaccine and the enormous support in funding and engagement by the public, each of these trials alone were enrolling 40,000 patients.
Wow.
So they were able to accelerate the pace by 10x. And that was only one. These were multiple. So we actually have more safety data on these two vaccines than we've ever had for any other vaccine that's been FDA approved. The concern for a vaccine happens within about 6 weeks. If people are going to have side effects, if people are going to have problems, humans get it. The way the immune system works, you get it within 6 weeks. This data didn't even go to the FDA until there was at least 2 months follow-up on every single patient within the trial. So the FDA actually held them back an additional 2 weeks. And like I said, normally vaccine trials go forward with 4,000 patients for FDA safety approval. They had 40,000 patients, and if you put all these trials together, they had hundreds of thousands of patients with now many, many months of follow-up. And it is probably one of the safest vaccines we've ever approved by the FDA. I feel safer about this vaccine than any other vaccine that I have seen approved by the FDA. And I have received both doses. I encourage anybody who gets offered this vaccine to take it. It's good for you, but even more importantly, it's good for humanity.
And I would say you've gotten your both because you're more special than I am. I've only gotten one so far. I got my first one, everybody, as you know, on January 6th. I'll get my second one on January 27th, 21 days later. Should I get the vaccine? Let's see who it was. Katie was asking if I'm pregnant. How about the vaccine if I'm pregnant and getting the vaccine if I'm breastfeeding my child?
So the data obviously isn't as robust in pregnant or breastfeeding people, but the FDA does not see any reason why it would not be safe and have recommended that pregnant people get it as well. There have been pregnant women vaccinated and the data is safe. We do know pregnant women do not do as well with the infection. So the risk of the vaccine is much, much, much lower than you remaining vulnerable to COVID. And so we do recommend pregnant people getting vaccinated.
And I got the Pfizer one because that's the one that Mayo Clinic started in our vaccination program on December 17, 2020. But from your standpoint, in the communities where it's getting rolled out, Pfizer or Moderna, would you say yes? As in whichever one is there, get that one?
Yes, fortunately, they're both the same mechanism of delivering the vaccine, and their data is virtually identical. I see them as interchangeable. The only difference is the second shot of Pfizer is after 3 weeks. The second shot of the Moderna is after 4 weeks. And so that's the only thing to be aware of that's slightly different, but the safety profiles, the efficacy, everything else is virtually interchangeable. So I would have taken either one.
And because I listen to my neighbor all the time, I got my influenza vaccine in October. But what for those who may not have yet gotten their influenza vaccine, first, shame on you out there. What should they do? Because the community program hasn't been rolled out yet. Should they go after they finish hearing us and get their influenza vaccine now and then get their COVID at least 14 days later? Or would you have them wait on their flu shot?
No, we absolutely want you to get your flu shot as soon as possible. Fortunately, people wearing masks and remaining socially distanced and washing their hands has dramatically decreased the amount of flu this season, but it's not zero. And so we absolutely want you to get your flu shot right away, and you wait 14 days after your flu shot before you're eligible to take your COVID shot. So if you're being offered the COVID shot right now, you have an appointment tomorrow, please go do the COVID shot. And then after your series has been complete, you're supposed to wait 14 days and then get your flu shot. But if your ticket's not up, so to speak, for COVID right now, go get the flu shot right away. And then 14 days later, you could start the COVID series.
Great. And we have had several questions come in. As you know, many of our families, their genetic heart disease was discovered because of expression of sudden death or sudden cardiac arrest of a child. And so we have the children well treated for their genetic heart condition. And I've said before that your genetic heart disease, if you are otherwise healthy and you are not obese and you don't have diabetes, you are not at greater risk of bad COVID-19 because you have long QT syndrome. Right. Your risk is the exact same as my children and family members' risk, low risk overall. So you should get the vaccine if you're 16 or older. But Stacey, what is the state of when will we? It is 16, right? There's no bending that 16. And if not, what should we be doing for the under 16 individuals? Will there be a vaccine for the under 16? When, if you had to anticipate that?
So the reason why it's over 16 is that was the age group that was enrolled in the clinical trials. So when the FDA was looking at the data, they could safely say it works and it's safe if you're 16 years or older. The trials in people under 16 are underway right now. So that's probably going to take several months till we have the data available. I can't tell you exactly when because it's at different phases of enrollment, and they need to determine how long it takes to show efficacy in that population. And that population tends to be less affected by COVID, so it may take longer till they manifest enough, symptomatic disease that they can actually show whether or not the placebo versus the active agent of vaccine is working. We're hoping by later in the year, hopefully by summer, maybe a little bit later, that data will be complete. It can then be compiled, go to the FDA, and if it is shown to be safe and effective, then it will be approved. So most people don't know, but if we were to bet $1, hopefully within 2021, we'll have data that vaccines are safe and effective in children as well.
That's great news. And if I'm 16 or older, is there any absolute contraindication to the vaccine? We want everybody to get it if they can. We think they all should.
Yeah.
But for example, I saw it, Maria. Hi, Maria. Her daughter has an allergy to nickel. Does that represent a problem to vaccination? Maybe in general, I don't think nickel does, but yeah. Are there specific ones where you say, oh, I guess we can't give you the vaccine?
They're very, very few with this vaccine. You can have an egg allergy and still get this vaccine. Nickel should not be a problem. There are a few very, very subtle vaccines that are subtle allergies that are very, very specific to some of the agents within this vaccine. And the people who have that know that they've had allergies to previous vaccines, and they should tell their healthcare worker, and the healthcare worker can specifically look into whether that agent is in this vaccine, but they're very, very unusual and very rare. We also do take pause if somebody's had Guillain-Barré syndrome from a previous vaccine. And that's not the vaccine causing it, but your body forms an immunologic reaction to the vaccine. It's extremely, extremely rare and has not been seen really in this one, but we would probably take pause if somebody has had that with previous vaccines. But other than those very rare situations, most people can take this vaccine.
Great. So Maria, your daughter and the rest of you, if you're 16 or older, don't worry about the nickel. You can get your vaccine. And I'll take Kristen's question where, Kristen, we know that some of our genetic heart disease families like Brugada syndrome, we know fever is a trigger and it doesn't matter the source of fever. So yes, if you have a febrile reaction to your vaccine, just promptly lower your fever. Don't freak out about it. Yeah. Just promptly lower your fever with acetaminophen, Tylenol, ibuprofen, whatever you like for your fever lowering strategy.
I think that's an important point, Mike, and if I can just follow up on that. This vaccine not infrequently causes fever after the second dose. And what we tell people is that is a good sign. I'm so happy for you that you got body aches and a fever from the vaccine. Many people get the flu vaccine and they go, I don't want it anymore, it gives me the flu. It's not giving you the flu. What it is your body is forming an immunologic response to the vaccine, and that's a good sign. So if you hear stories of people getting a fever from this vaccine or feeling sick for 24 hours or body aches, that is not a bad sign. That is a good sign. And so we recommend exactly as Dr. Ackerman said, take Tylenol, take acetaminophen, NSAIDs. Usually it lasts about 24 hours and then people feel totally fine afterwards. So please don't be scared away from stories you hear about fevers after the vaccine.
Thanks for saying that, because that's so important. Because how many times have we heard, I'm not getting that shot again. I got sick from the shot. I got the flu. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's working. So be happy that you got the fever after your second one. Now, like she said, I didn't get anything after the first one. So I'm waiting to see what happens with what people are saying with the feeling a little bit crummy for the first 24 hours after shot number 2. I'll let you all know. But I guess now I have to look forward and be glad that I got the fever. Yeah. Before we leave vaccines and touch on the other bucks, I think one that even in our SADS community is coming up is I'm hearing over and over surprising hesitancy about getting the vaccine. Like, yes, this has happened. This is Operation Warp Speed. This was amazingly fast, but maybe this is too fast. And I don't think I want to get the vaccine. Or if I'm low risk, I'm young, not obese, why don't I just take my chances and let myself get the infection naturally and get my own immunity naturally? And for those out there, Dr. Rizza, who find themselves either admitting that they're not going to get it or thinking that they don't want to get it, the vaccine that is, what would you say to them to encourage them to not go down that road and instead sign up for the vaccine as soon as they are eligible, just like you and I chose to do?
Yeah, excellent question. I've been a little disappointed and at least aware now on how much vaccine hesitancy is out there. And if there's any opportunity I can use to encourage people to get this vaccine, I welcome it. As I said earlier, the safety and the science were not accelerated. What was accelerated was the funding, the paperwork, the regulatory steps that were normally put in place to slow people down were accelerated. The rigor, the safety requirements, and the science were not accelerated. In fact, anything, we have more safety data over a longer period of time than virtually any other vaccine that's been approved before. So I feel very comfortable that this is a safe vaccine, and there was nothing about the safety or the carefulness on how this vaccine came through. It was just that everything else was put on hold and massive numbers of people and everything was prioritized for this vaccine. And that's how it was able to go through quickly. I think it's important to understand that there are a few things that people may not realize. The vaccine may give you longer protective immunity than a natural infection. We don't know yet, but there's a good chance it does. Also, Getting the virus, even if you're fairly asymptomatic, may have some longer term effects we're not aware of. So being vaccinated so that you don't get infected is very important. And also, I think all of us want to get back to doing things we did pre-COVID. We want to see our family again. We want to get together for dinner dates. We want to go to sporting events. We want to travel. If you want those restrictions to be lifted, we need to have the virus stop moving from person to person. And so every human being who has a protective immunity from the vaccine will decrease the ability for this virus to move. Once we get to a critical number of people or a percentage of the population that's been vaccinated and has protective immunity, then the virus won't have anywhere to go, the pandemic will slow down, and we can get back to those things we love. So I say to people, it's safe, it works, and if you want to get back to the way things were, even if you're the healthiest, youngest person in the world, getting the vaccine is going to help society and get us back to the way we were faster.
When do you think, what number do we need to get to? I'm reminded that I think Dr. Fauci, who many of us think has done a really good job, but maybe not a great job, everybody fumbles, but some would suggest he fumbled when he said the herd immunity needs to be at 60% as the starter, and then maybe move the goalpost to 80% and then caught a little airtime about that. What kind of number do we need to be at? I mean, because I think we can handle the truth. And I think whatever that number is, if it's conveyed to us honestly as to the why, people can sort of say, okay, if that's what it takes, I'm all in.
Yeah.
What's the number that you think is the number that is necessary to get this virus to stop?
So I'll begin by saying nobody knows. And that's part of why Dr. Fauci has gone back and forth a few times. His original comment, 60%, is what we see with many other respiratory viruses. He made that comment months and months and months ago. And that's what you would need for influenza. That's what you need for many of these other viruses. This one, unfortunately, is a little more infectious. So we're going to need much higher than 60%. In fact, he said 85. Many people are predicting 85 to 90. So we really need this virus is so infectious. We need a very high percentage of society to have immunity before it's going to significantly slow down and get us through this pandemic. So we really need people to engage. And if you're offered the vaccine, even if you feel fine, even if you don't think you're at risk, please get vaccinated, because we need that many members of society to be immune before we see this slowing down. It may be 82, it may be 92. I think it's going to be significantly above 60 to 70%.
And you said it's because it's so highly infectious. And that brings me to Amy. Hello, Amy from Dublin, and Sally in the United Kingdom. If we think our virus is highly infectious, we do have the UK variant, or however it's being called, that seems to be really highly contagious in the United Kingdom and Ireland, and has made its way to the United States. Some have said, the CDC, that if we don't get things under control, that particular SARS-CoV-2 variant may become the most common one in the United States. What do we need to be thinking about or being aware about with the viral variants?
So as I mentioned earlier, it is not unusual for viruses to mutate. It happens all the time. We knew it was going to happen with this one. It's happened with virtually every other virus that infects humans. What matters is if it mutates in a part of the virus that does something we care about. So the two big ones that I mentioned earlier we care about is if it makes the virus resistant to our drugs or our vaccines. And so far, the ones that have done that have luckily burnt themselves out because they're not very fit. The other thing we care about is if it changes the nature of the infection. So if it's deadlier or causes more liver disease or something like that. And so far, none of the variants have been shown to do that. What this one has done, and we've had another one in the US previously, and what the B117 variant is that we've seen in the UK and is now in the United States, is it makes the virus more infectious, because the way the virus gets into a cell is if my fist is the virus and my hand is the receptor, the virus has to bind to the receptor to get into the cell. And this variant binds better. So it's has much greater affinity and binds much better the receptor. And so that's what makes it more infectious. Fortunately, it's transmitted the same way. It causes the same disease in the body. It's equally as responsive to the drugs. It's equally as responsive to the vaccine so far from the data we've seen. And the exact same public health measures that prevent transmission of the wild type virus work for this one equally as well. Wearing a mask, socially distancing, washing your hands, and disinfecting high touch areas. So if you should not, in fact, in many ways, we don't even care about it as doctors because we treat it the same way, we prevent it the same way, it does the same thing. We just know it is more infectious. So if you're not following those measures and you're exposed to it, you're more likely to get infected than you were with the wild type virus.
So even though it can get in so much easier by binding to that receptor better, that particular variant is not causing a worse form of COVID-19?
Exactly. It causes the same disease and it responds equally as well to the drugs.
Well, that's great news.
Yes, it is.
So maybe I give in the last 4 minutes of our time together, the question that so many people are wondering is, when do I get a stop with the face mask? I thought that when we got the vaccine,
Yeah.
I wouldn't need the face mask any longer. Could you clarify, and so people understand that this isn't some masking conspiracy, but this is just the deal that we're going to need to do for a while?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up that point. So as I mentioned before, we know masking and social distancing works. It works. It works on the variants. It works on the wild type. It slows down transmission. It prevents deaths. Flat out, that's black and white. We cannot stop that until we have all the other parts of that Venn diagram solidified. We have herd immunity in a large percentage of the population. We have testing that's on the ball, where it can test people as soon as they're symptomatic, and we can get them early treatment so they don't go forward to bad disease. And so you can't take away any of those three elements until all of them are in place. So literally until we have very, very high herd immunity, everybody's going to have to wear a mask. And like I said, we don't know yet if vaccinated people cannot shed. In fact, there's a suspicion in data that even if you're vaccinated, you could still be infected. You won't know. You feel utterly fine because you have an immune response, but you could still have the virus in your nose and in your mouth, and you could still shed it to other people, and it could continue the pandemic. So until we have excellent herd immunity in most of the population, we're going to be wearing masks and social distancing. Now, people ask me to guess what the date's going to be, and I obviously can't because I don't know how quickly the vaccine will roll out or how quickly people will accept it and how long it'll take to build that immunity. But the masking is going to be the last thing to go. As the death rate goes down and the hospitalizations go down and the community transmission goes down, we may be able to start gathering a little bit more. We may be able to do a few more activities, but the very last thing to go is masking, because that's actually the most effective part. If you're not standing far apart and you're wearing a mask, that's far more important, is the masking. So the masking, if you're close together, is going to be the last thing to go. I am guessing we are still going to be masking indoors in public places through the end of 2021, at least. I hope I'm wrong. It may stop sooner than that. But my guess is at some level, some of the other restrictions may lift over time as more people get vaccinated. But I'm guessing we'll still have masks in our lives through this year.
Well, that's probably not the news that we want, but I think we can take the truth, right? If for those of you out there, if that's what it's going to take, then we just need to, fasten our seatbelts and do it. And I think it's safe to say for all of you who've joined us live and will watch this program, I think you can see readily why Dr. Stacey Rizza is not only a neighbor that my wife and family and I love, she and her husband and her children, but she's also a colleague here at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, that we are so glad that she alone and with her husband, Dr. Andrew Badley, have been the leaders of our COVID-19 program from the beginning. And we're very grateful and fortunate to have them, just like we have been fortunate and lucky to have a virus that the enterprise, the global science has created an incredible vaccine for. We are very fortunate and lucky here at Mayo Clinic to have Dr. Stacey Rizza on our team. And so I just want to thank you, Stacey, for taking your time out to join us. It was 6 months ago that you joined us for the first time.
Yeah.
And so if I could I invite you to join us for the trifecta in 6 months from now for another progress report?
I would love to, and I look forward to it. And I'm hoping we have even more good news by that time.
Well, we've had a lot of good news overall since we were first together. Obviously, the number of deaths is tragic and should be inspiring all of us to do everything we can to do our part to bring an end to this pandemic. And so for all of you out there in sad Facebook Live land, stay well this weekend, stay corona free for as long as you can, get the vaccine when you can, and even after you have or until you do, keep the mask on. I'm wearing mine. Dr. Rizza wears hers. Please wear yours as well. And so have a wonderful weekend, everybody, and I'll see you all next Friday. Thank you.
Thank you.